G'day everyone, I'm the Gravetender, and welcome to the other side. In 1998, platform gaming was presented with one of its most innovative and quirky titles, Banjo Kazooie. It was a game which encouraged exploration of a fantastical world, provided players with a plethora of platforming challenges, all the while interacting with a cast of unique characters. Since its release, it's gone down in history as one of the best adventure games of its generation, and has been lucky enough to have had 2 sequels. Yet only one of those sequels retained what made the first game so beloved in the first place, while the other attempted to breathe life back into this old IP by adding in a number of tedious gameplay mechanics. People didn't want a car-making simulator. People wanted another adventure game. One full of collectibles, vibrant worlds to explore, and a cast of bizarre characters that could only exist in an equally bizarre world. Yet since 2008, gamers have been forced to face the reality that Banjo Kazooie might never return to its glory days. But that hasn't stopped the original developers from trying to resurrect them, or rather allow someone else to take Banjo Kazooie's place. In 2014, Playtonic Games became known to the world. Made up of old employees from Rare, this new gaming studio hoped to create a spiritual successor to Banjo Kazooie. By utilizing Kickstarter, a crowdfunding website, they were able to obtain the funds necessary to not only create this game, but expand their original vision of it. However, the question must be asked. Is this the true third Banjo Kazooie game we've been waiting for, or simply a desperate attempt to recapture the former's legacy? Let's find out. This is Yooka Laylee. In a fantastical world full of color and magical creatures resides the evil corporation Hivory Towers. It's here that the evil capitalist B, CEO of Hivory Towers, desires to convert all the world's literature into profit and establish a monopoly over the book industry. Now it's up to a lizard named Yooka and his best friend Laylee the Bat to stop him and his evil associate, Dr. Quack. Before capitalist B can recover all of the pages of the legendary One Book and rewrite the universe in his image. It's an absurd story that fits the tone and style of this outlandish world, giving the game developers plenty of room to experiment and create a chaotic cast of characters for the player to interact with. But if you're expecting the main characters or even the side characters to be adversely affected by the high stakes present in the narrative, then you're going to be disappointed. Aside from Capital B and his assistant, nobody else is aware of the villain's true motives. Yooka and Laylee originally seek out the book they lost because they believed it'd lead them to treasure, and nothing more. The fact is, this is a story in which neither party is remotely aware of the other's intentions, and this gives both sides the chance to indulge in some classic cartoonish humor. From the dialogue to even the designs of the NPCs you encounter, it's quite obvious that you're not supposed to take any of this seriously. Even the main villain is treated as a joke by both his subordinates and his fellow businessmen. Capital B is simply a corrupt businessman willing to do anything to increase his profit and nothing more. There's no real depth to him. This simplicity is extended to our main characters, who, while they don't change on an emotional level, each have a clearly defined role, which when melded together form a solid duo. Yooka is a charming do-gooder who naively trusts those around him, while Laylee is the exact opposite. She rarely says anything nice and will often insult or snidely comment on the designs of the game's various NPCs. Both perfectly balance out each other and are naturally inspired by Banjo Kazooie's dynamic. In fact, it's not much of a surprise that you'll find Banjo Kazooie's influence in world design everywhere you look in this game. This is a world that was designed to emulate retro platformers while also providing as many modern jokes and quirks as possible. From references to this being a Kickstarter game to Laylee openly mocking how predictable certain character names are. There's no real complexity to be found in this game's story, aside from the side characters and their numerous quests which fit into their preset archetypes. So by the end of the game, the narrative reaches a natural conclusion that's as absurd as its beginning. Yet while the simplicity in the story works to the character's benefit, the same couldn't be said for the gameplay. Like the old school platformers this game is based on, Yooka Laylee can be boiled down to traveling between different worlds, acquiring collectibles in order to advance, and unlocking new abilities to explore these worlds. With simple controls and a straightforward interface, these moves are easy enough to understand and master, at least in the beginning. Your basic abilities consist of a spin attack, a roll, and a double jump. With these, you can easily traverse the environment at high speeds, climb up large structures, and take on groups of enemies. As you progress though, you'll naturally acquire new abilities to use for a number of different purposes. Some of these will be useful for puzzles, while others are clearly intended for combat. Knowing when and where to use these abilities is critical to mastering the mechanics of this game, and thankfully the game does a good job of explaining the importance of each skill. However, the biggest issues arise not from the mechanics, but how they are implemented gameplay-wise. For starters, you have an energy meter which is used whenever you utilize one of your skills. On paper, it's a pretty straightforward mechanic, and you can find collectibles to increase how much energy Yooka has, but there is a clear issue with it. Since you often use Yooka's role to maneuver around your environment, you're constantly forced to stop moving whenever your energy meter runs low. This dramatically disrupts the flow of speed, making it harder to maintain momentum throughout a level. It'd be like taking Spyro's charge move and slapping a 5-second time limit on it, while also giving it a 20-second cooldown. Granted, the developers did provide you a way of regaining energy by rolling into butterflies, but it still doesn't solve the issue itself. In regards to combat, overall it's pretty basic. Your spin move is good enough to deal with most basic foes, but if you need to deal with someone from a long range, then Yooka can absorb certain elements from his environment to use as projectiles. However, in order to properly aim, you need to enter the game's first-person mode, which is very reminiscent of Jak and Daxter's own first-person mode. Your camera moves too slowly, and you're locked in place while you're in this state. Thankfully, you can still fire projectiles while in third person, but oftentimes you'll miss your intended target due to your character's position in relation to the enemy. This is only made even more frustrating due to how poorly designed the enemies you fight are. While each world has its own distinct look for its inhabitants, the sad truth is they all share the same moveset, which is to simply charge at you or attack from a distance with projectiles. The only enemies which actually have distinct moves and mechanics are the bosses, and even then I wouldn't give them an award for top tier game design. Most of the bosses are essentially platforming challenges, who seem to always be able to hit you regardless of where you are on screen. Furthermore, many of them ramp up the difficulty by having attacks which are either too fast to dodge or simply appear out of nowhere, making these boss fights less a test of skill and more a test of your patience. There's simply nothing more frustrating than getting killed over and over again because of an attack you can't avoid or even see coming. In short, the bosses can go and get fucked. Aside from that, there's nothing else really to say about the combat. You do acquire some additional combat related skills, but unless you want to give your enemies a chance to earn a free hit on you, they're mostly pointless. In fact, the vast majority of the skills you acquire in-game, you usually only use in certain instances. Any other time and you're basically restricted to using your basic skill set. It's not like Mario Odyssey where you can utilize all your skills in a number of different ways to complete challenges in the game world. There's usually only one solution per puzzle and that's it. Take for instance whenever you transform. There's a character in the game called Dr. Puzz and she's capable of changing her character into various different forms. Like in one level she'll turn you into a flower and in another you'll turn into a tractor. These forms all have limited movesets and you'll often be forced to complete platforming challenges while you're like this. Furthermore, you'll only ever use these transformations for 1 or 2 specific instances per world and that's it. Afterwards you'll never have to transform again and the game gives you no reason why you should. The inclusion of these segments in the game just feels pointless. Oh, and speaking of pointless gameplay segments, who the fuck designed the minecart sections in this game? Listen, I know you want to appeal to your Donkey Kong Country audience and include another zany character in your game, but if you're going to bring in a side-scrolling section, make sure the player can actually see what's ahead of him. I swear to God, I've died more times during these platforming challenges than at any other moment in Yooka Laylee. The minecart controls in this are fucking atrocious. Half the time you try to jump over a gap, you don't even clear enough distance, and to make matters worse, you need to get a high score in each one of these challenges, otherwise you have to start the whole fucking thing all over again. It's easily one of the most tedious parts of this entire game, which, when compared to Yooka's slurp state, makes it painfully obvious that certain gameplay mechanics were added in just because they could be. As I mentioned before, Yooka can absorb certain properties which can usually be used in 2 different ways. Either as a long-range weapon, or to alter his own body by absorbing certain elements. Like eating coals and becoming immune to fire, or eating glowworms and becoming a living light bulb. There's quite a selection to choose from, and often you'll use these elements to acquire some of the game's more difficult pages. However, outside of these instances, the slurp state is never used. It's simply a means to complete challenges and nothing more, which ultimately becomes redundant once you learn how to fly. But even then, you'll probably prefer staying on the ground due to how difficult it is to control yourself while in the air. Unlike when you're simply gliding around for short distances, whenever Laylee takes flight, your movement speed is greatly reduced, except when moving upwards. The same could be said for whenever you're submerged in water. Either way, controlling yourself is more difficult than it needs to be. Simply turning yourself around can take several seconds, and it certainly doesn't help that you have no way of controlling how fast you move while airborne or in the water. If they'd simply made it easier for you to increase or decrease your speed while in either state, then maneuvering yourself around would have been a hell of a lot easier. In fact, your movement speed as a whole is incredibly unrefined. Either your character is moving too fast to properly maneuver themselves, or you're too slow to avoid incoming attacks. There's no in-between, and the game provides you with little room for recovery should you take damage. These issues are made even more noticeable due to the game's camera, which is easily one of the most indecisive gameplay elements in Yooka Laylee. For starters, you can't completely control it. At times, you'll only be able to move it from side to side. Other times you can actually look up or down, but more often you can't. This is especially common in some of the harder platforming challenges, which can often result in the path ahead being blocked simply because you can't look in a particular direction. Furthermore, there are a number of instances in which the camera is firmly locked in place, often emulating a 2D platformer or a top-down perspective, which again can result in you dying because you can't see where you're going most of the time. While in the beginning these issues aren't that noticeable, as time goes on and the difficulty rises, these flaws become harder to ignore, making what should be an enjoyable adventure a hell of a lot more difficult than it should be. Thankfully, the controls are easy enough to implement, but due to how frantic the gameplay becomes in Yooka Laylee, it's easy to lose yourself amidst the chaos. Especially since most of these moves require several seconds to activate, forcing you to time each of these actions correctly, otherwise you'll simply get hurt. This in conjunction with the game's camera can result in you dying often and without warning. So the gameplay itself is imperfect, but with 5 massive worlds to explore, you'd think the content each provides would be enough to look past these flaws, right? Well, sadly you'd be wrong. Among these 5 worlds there is also Hivory Towers, which serves as the main hub world. Each world has their own distinct theme, challenges, and character-driven quests to be found. However, what's interesting is that when you first unlock a level, you'll only be able to explore part of it. In order to explore an entire world, you'll need to expand it, which is done by spending pages. This expansion can alter your world in several different ways, whether by simply unlocking a previously inaccessible area or by introducing new structures and locations onto a map. These expansions do a good job of encouraging you to revisit old levels and see what's new. But due to their sheer size, it can be quite overwhelming. Banjo Kazooie levels were always quite small, but they were full of secrets and collectibles, so they felt bigger than they actually were. By comparison, this game's levels are massive, with many areas featuring literally nothing in them, which often leads to exploration feeling less rewarding and more monotonous. In fact, by the endgame, you'll often be spending your time rolling around aimlessly, keeping an eye on your energy meter as you search for the last couple of missing collectibles, uncertain if that one item you're missing is in this particular area or on the other side of the game world. One of the benefits of having a smaller game world is that there's less space to wander and more chances that the player will naturally discover items that they're missing. Furthermore, due to the world design, it's quite obvious that certain areas were made with certain challenges and abilities in mind. You'll often find large portions of levels completely cut off from others so that they can serve a particular purpose. In most platforming games, having multiple levels allows the game designers to build the world around the challenges, rather than having to insert the challenges into the world, which seems to be the case here. It can really break your immersion, and it certainly doesn't help that many of these challenges do get repeated throughout the game. Still, it's not exactly a deal breaker, and I won't deny that many of these challenges are quite fun. So on paper, this game does give you exactly what you paid for. A platforming collectathon with a clear emphasis on maneuvering through your environment in a variety of different ways. From the pages that unlock new worlds to the quills which can be used to buy new skills. However, what I believe this game's biggest issue would be the length of its challenges. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, let me explain. Like I said earlier, each world has a selection of challenges for you to complete and unlock collectibles from. This in turn enables you to access new worlds and new challenges. This is the cycle of the collectathon and there's nothing wrong with it. At least when it's designed well. However, due to the issues with the gameplay as previously mentioned, the difficulty of these challenges can rise and fall exponentially. Some challenges can be completed easily while others could take you literally hours just so you can collect a single fucking pagey. This naturally can sour your experience with this game. Take for instance the retro sequences. My god, I fucking hate these. To put it simply, these are minigames which are based on old arcade games and completing these can unlock you a pagey. In theory, these sequences should be quick breaks from the standard gameplay and a means to enjoy some classic game design. Yet thanks to a lack of polish, each of these sequences are incredibly difficult and due to how long some of them are, can literally take you hours to complete. especially since you'll need a high score on each level in order to earn both pages from them. It also doesn't help that many of these retro games seem to be deliberately designed to block your character's movements. There are many sequences like this throughout the game, and the fact that this is a common problem throughout Yooka Laylee is bloody infuriating. Honestly, if they'd simply shortened the levels and removed some of the hazards in these challenges, then I reckon they would have been a lot more enjoyable. Not to mention the difficulty as a whole would be lowered as a result. It's a simple change, but it'd make a huge difference in the long run. But as it is right now, these minigames have some of the most frustrating gameplay I've ever had to experience. Plus, having to repeat the same sequence over and over again can really spoil one's appreciation for this game's music and sound design. It perfectly encapsulates the feeling of a 90s game by maintaining a simple series of beats and sounds with every track. But now, with modern technology and no limitations on game memory, the developers are able to expand upon these simple tracks, which as a result has made the music more grandiose without losing any of its charm. While the dialogue retains its Banjo Kazooie origins by simply being a series of repeated snippets at different pitches, it's quite adorable and really does a good job of helping to alleviate the tension throughout the game. Although I wouldn't blame anyone if they found it annoying after a while. Furthermore, the sound effects present throughout each level do a good job to help set the scene. It might not be enough to convince you that this is a living, breathing world, but whether it be from fire burning, water flowing, giggling ghosts, or Laylee breathing in quickly as she flies, the sounds present in this game work wonders to help immerse you in this bizarre world, and there's no better time when the sound design is on full display than whenever you take in this game's massive vistas. Considering that this was a crowd-funded game, it's quite clear that a lot of work went into making this game look as good as possible, all the while maintaining Banjo Kazooie's cartoony art style. All of the characters in this game look as though they were drawn for a children's show, while most of the environments have a solid blend of different colors and tones. This game has been rendered with the Unity engine, and it's clear that the developers enjoyed crafting each of this game's individual worlds. Still, it's clear that some of the environments and characters were given more time and development than others. World 3 and 4 in particular clearly don't measure up when compared to the other levels' visuals. Furthermore, Yooka Laylee's usage of shadows and darker colors can often hinder one's progress in game. The only instances in which this is clearly deliberate is whenever you're given the chance to consume glowworms. But considering that one world is quite literally a dark, murky swamp, you'd think that the developers would have improved the lighting in the area or simply altered the color palette so that maneuvering through it is easier. Thankfully, the rest of the game maintains a pretty consistent range of colors, so it doesn't become too overwhelming or difficult for the player to interact with. Yet the sad truth is, there's not much else that's genuinely good about Yooka Laylee, which is a tragedy. It had everything people wanted and more. Each of its game worlds had its own unique flair to it, and there was plenty of skills to help you maneuver these vast environments. The collectibles alone are enough to keep a person busy for weeks on end. Yet due to a lack of polish and spikes in difficulty, this game simply left a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't feel accomplished or satisfied when I completed Yooka Laylee. By the end of it, I was simply too frustrated and bored to care about this game anymore. Which isn't an ideal impression to be left with, especially for a game that's targeting a younger demographic. So I hope that Yooka Laylee and the Impossible Lair has managed to improve upon the foundations that this game has created. Otherwise, I'm going to be extremely disappointed in Playtonic Games. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. I'm the Grave Tender, and thank you for joining me on the other side. Please consider subscribing, and I hope you all have a nice day.